The morning sun rose over the quiet neighborhood, birds sang in the distance, and sprinklers hissed softly across trimmed lawns. But inside one house the peace shattered with the sound of an envelope being torn open. The man stood in his kitchen with a cup of coffee in his hand, his eyes scanning the letter, and as the words sank in his face grew still, the HOA had fined him $70,000. The number printed in bold letters like a slap across his pride. He set the coffee down slowly, his fingers tightening around the paper, his heart beating harder. Neighbors passing by outside saw him through the window, some curious, some smirking as if they already knew what was written in the letter. Whispers had been spreading for weeks, whispers about his ongoing argument with the HOA, and now the proof was here. Karen, the president of the HOA, the woman known for her sharp tongue and stricter rules, had finally pulled her biggest move. She believed she had destroyed him. $70,000 was no small fine. It was crushing, enough to break most families in the neighborhood, and she imagined him begging for relief, crawling for mercy. But what she did not know was that the man's silence was not weakness. It was the calm before a storm. He stood still for a long time, reading the letter again and again, not a single muscle moving in his face. He did not shout. He did not curse. He did not slam the table like most men would. Instead he folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and set it aside as if it meant nothing at all. His calmness unsettled even himself for a moment. But deep inside he knew why. He carried a secret that none of them, not Karen, not the HOA board, not even his closest neighbors, had ever thought to ask about, a secret that turned the meaning of the letter upside down. Outside on the street, two women walking dogs slowed their steps. Glancing toward his house, one whispered, "Did you hear? They fined him $70,000. The other gasped, "How will he ever pay? Karen says she'll take him to court." Their words floated through the open window, but he did not react. He sipped his coffee again, his face unreadable. He had faced worse storms than this, and he knew patience was his sharpest weapon. By noon the story had spread further. Neighbors gathered in small groups near the mailbox, whispering, some pitying him, others smiling cruelly. Karen drove by slowly in her shiny car, rolling down her window just enough to speak to a group of residents. She raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Rules are rules. No one is above the HOA, not even him." She smirked, her red lipstick glowing in the sun. The neighbors chuckled nervously. Nobody dared to challenge her. They all remembered the time she had fined others for small things, a flower planted without approval, a garage door left open too long, a car parked 2 inches off the line. But never had she issued a fine this huge. $70,000 was unheard of. It was not about money anymore. It was about power, and Karen loved nothing more than showing she held it. She believed he would break. She believed she had cornered him completely. But what she did not see was the faint smile that crossed his lips as he stood behind the curtains watching her drive away. That night the neighborhood meeting was announced. Karen sent emails declaring the fine official, declaring that rules had to be respected. She prepared herself to stand in front of everyone and humiliate him, to hold him up as an example of what happens when you cross her. But while she rehearsed her speech in front of a mirror, the man sat in his study quietly, looking at documents in a folder he had kept hidden for years. Papers that carried his name, signatures, and deeds, papers that held the key to the neighborhood's lifeline. He ran his fingers across the pages, not with greed but with calm certainty. They thought they had power over him. They thought they could crush him under the weight of their fine. But he knew something they did not, something they would never see coming. Outside the night grew darker, the street lamps hummed, and while the rest of the neighborhood whispered and speculated, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold and steady, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When morning came, the letter still sat on his counter, untouched, as though it were nothing more than a piece of junk mail. The neighbors expected to see him rushing to lawyers or arguing with the HOA office. But instead he walked calmly through his garden, trimming hedges, watering flowers, and even greeting a passing neighbor with a nod. His peace was unsettling. People expected rage, fear, or despair. But he carried none of it, only silence. Karen watched from her window across the street. Her eyes narrowing, she could not understand why he was not broken, why he was not running in circles like the others before him. Her confidence wavered for a moment, but she quickly brushed it aside, convincing herself that he was only pretending, that soon he would come begging. But deep inside a faint unease had begun to creep into her heart. Something about his silence felt dangerous. Something about his calmness felt like a storm waiting behind the horizon. and though she would never admit it, for the first time she wondered if she had underestimated him. The man, however, kept his secret close, never letting it slip in his expression. Never letting the neighbors see the fire behind his still eyes. He knew timing was everything. He knew the power of silence, and so he waited, every whisper against him building tension. Every smug smile from Karen feeding the trap she was walking into. $70,000 meant nothing compared to what he held in his hands. And when the time was right, the neighborhood would learn the truth, not through shouts, not through anger, but through the calm voice of a man who owned more than they ever realized. For now he let them laugh, let them gossip, let Karen celebrate her victory, because he knew that when the truth came out, her pride, her power, and her control over the neighborhood would collapse in front of everyone's eyes. And the fine that was meant to destroy him would become the key to her downfall. The evening of the neighborhood meeting arrived and the community clubhouse was filled with chatter. Residents sat in rows of chairs, some excited, some nervous, but most curious to see what would happen. The man entered quietly, his steps slow, his face calm as ever, and his silence unsettled everyone. Karen stood at the front with her clipboard, dressed sharply as if for battle. Her lips curved in a smug smile. She cleared her throat loudly and announced to everyone that the HOA was proud to enforce rules strictly and fairly. She pointed toward him, telling the crowd how he had broken several rules, how he had ignored notices, and how his fine of $70,000 was proof that no one could escape the HOA. The neighbors looked at each other, some whispering, some shaking their heads in pity, others smirking with Karen. The man sat still, his hands folded, his eyes steady on her, his silence louder than any argument. She expected him to rise and protest. She wanted him to shout, to lose control so she could crush him further. But he simply nodded slowly as if her words meant nothing. His calmness made the room uneasy. The whispers grew. Why isn't he defending himself? Why does he look so sure? What does he know that we don't? Karen noticed the shift in the air but pushed forward, raising her voice even higher, accusing him of disrespecting the community, of setting a bad example. Her words sharp like knives. Yet none of them cut him. He sat like a stone, waiting. After the meeting ended, neighbors walked past him carefully. Some avoided eye contact, some offered fake smiles, and some whispered insults under their breath. Karen passed close to him, leaning down to his softly so only he could hear. You will pay or you will lose everything. Her eyes glowed with pride. She believed she had trapped him. He looked back at her, his face blank, only replying in a voice so calm it sent a shiver down her spine. We'll see. And then he walked out into the night. Without another word, the darkness swallowed him, but his silence lingered in the clubhouse, unsettling even those who had laughed moments before. Karen stood stiff for a moment, shaking off the strange feeling, convincing herself she still held all the power. But deep inside a flicker of doubt gnawed at her. She had pushed many neighbors before. She had crushed them with fines, lawsuits, and threats. But none of them had ever looked at her the way he did. None of them had ever carried such stillness in the face of destruction. The next morning the whispers grew louder. Neighbors gathered near mailboxes, at coffee shops, and along sidewalks, discussing the fine. Some argued he was foolish not to fight back. Others insisted he must be hiding money somewhere to survive such a blow. Children repeated what their parents whispered, saying his house would soon be taken, his cars sold, his life destroyed. But the man walked through the neighborhood with calm steps, greeting people politely, even smiling at children. His peace only deepened the mystery. One neighbor muttered, he should be desperate. But look at him. He looks like he's waiting for something. Another replied nervously, maybe he knows something we don't. The air of doubt began to spread like smoke, and though most of them still sided with Karen out of fear, many could not shake the thought that something larger was at play. Karen meanwhile celebrated her victory openly. She called a few close allies to her house, pouring glasses of wine, laughing loudly, telling them that soon he would crawl back begging, that 70,000 would crush his pride. Her guests laughed with her, though some of their smiles were forced. Some of them wondered quietly if she had gone too far. But Karen loved the sound of her own voice too much to care. She had built her power on fear, on making examples of those who opposed her, and she believed this would be her crowning triumph. Yet as she laughed, her eyes kept drifting toward his house across the street, dark and quiet, and for reasons she could not explain, her laughter sometimes faltered. His silence weighed on her like an unseen storm cloud, and though she shook the thought away, she could not escape the faint chill that crawled down her spine each time she remembered his calm words. we'll see. At night the man sat in his study, the letter lying on his desk beside a thick folder of papers. He ran his fingers across the documents slowly. Deeds and records that held the truth no one in the neighborhood had bothered to uncover. The road they all depended on. The only road in and out of the community, had been his for years, bought quietly, registered under his name, maintained with his money. He had never spoken of it, never used it, never flaunted it. But now, as Karen tightened her grip and tried to humiliate him, he knew it was time. He knew the moment would soon come when silence would turn into revelation. When the balance of power would flip, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold but calm, whispering to himself, "Let her laugh, let them. All laugh, soon they will see." Outside the neighborhood slept, unaware that the ground beneath their power was about to be pulled away, and the man waited patiently, his silence stronger than any weapon he had ever held. The days that followed grew tense in the neighborhood. People whispered more than ever. They avoided his house as if it carried some hidden curse. When he walked down the street, children stopped playing and stared. Parents pulled them back quickly and whispered warnings. The man noticed it all but said nothing. His silence made the neighbors uneasy. Some thought he had accepted his fate. Others thought he was planning something in secret. Karen, on the other hand, enjoyed every moment. She walked around with her clipboard in hand, her red jacket bright against the sun, stopping at houses and reminding everyone about fines, rules, and meetings. She made sure to speak loudly whenever he passed by, telling people, 70,000, can you imagine? That's what happens when you think you're above the rules. The neighbors nodded nervously. Some laughed to please her. But many kept their eyes on him, confused by the way he carried himself. His steps calm, his face unreadable, his silence heavier than her words. One afternoon a neighbor complained about the road leading into the community. Potholes had grown bigger, delivery trucks slowed down to avoid damage, and children stumbled while riding their bikes. Everyone looked to Karen expecting her to fix it. But she waved her hand and said, "We'll take care of it soon," her tone careless. The man overheard from a distance, and for the first time a smirk crossed his face, so small and quick that nobody noticed. He continued walking as if nothing had happened. But inside he knew the truth. The road they all depended on was not Karen's responsibility, not the HOA's. It was his, bought and owned years ago. A secret he had kept quiet. A secret he would soon use. Karen had no idea that her power was built on land she did not control. The irony made his chest tighten with dark amusement. While she paraded around boasting of her authority, she was standing on ground that belonged to him. As days passed, the tension grew thicker. More notices appeared on his door. More letters arrived with threats of legal action. Neighbors avoided greeting him, fearing Karen's wrath, and yet he never once looked troubled. He watered his garden, repaired his fence, and even whistled while sitting on his porch. His calmness became a mystery. Whispers spread like wildfire. Maybe he has a secret fortune. Maybe he knows someone in government. Maybe he plans to sue the HOA. The curiosity grew, and with curiosity came fear, for no one truly understood him. No one could predict what he might do. Karen noticed too. Her pride swelling but her unease growing quietly. She asked herself why he did not break, why he did not scream or fight, why he looked at her with eyes that carried no fear, only patience. She tried to shake it off, but the doubt stayed, nagging her in moments of silence, making her wonder if perhaps she had underestimated the wrong man. At night the neighborhood fell quiet, lights turned off one by one. But in his study the lamp still burned. The man sat at his desk with the folder of papers spread open before him. Documents proving his ownership of the only road in and out of the neighborhood, maps, deeds, signatures, all legal and binding. He touched the pages carefully, not with greed but with certainty. He knew the power he held. He knew that with one word he could change everything. He closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting to the window, watching Karen's house across the street. Its lights glowing brightly as she prepared her next move. He whispered softly to himself, "Enjoy your victory while it lasts. Because soon the rules will no longer be yours. Soon the neighborhood will see who truly holds the power." His voice faded into the night, the silence of his house echoing like thunder in the distance, and though no one else heard it, the storm had already begun to form one evening as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the neighborhood. A small argument broke out near the entrance road. A delivery truck had struck one of the deep potholes, its tire bursting loudly. The driver cursed while neighbors gathered, angry and frustrated. "Why hasn't this road been fixed?" One man shouted, another added, We pay all these HOA fees but nothing ever gets done. Karen arrived quickly, clipboard in hand, her red jacket bright against the fading light. She waved her hands to quiet them, promising repairs soon, telling them not to worry. But her words lacked weight. Everyone could see the cracks in the road, the broken pavement, the danger growing worse each day. Some residents muttered that their cars had already been damaged. Others complained about children tripping while riding bikes. The frustration built. Yet Karen smiled tightly, her pride not allowing her to admit failure. She said loudly, "The HOA is in control. We will handle it. Trust me." Her voice firm but her eyes flickered when she noticed the man standing at the edge of the crowd, silent as always, watching. He didn't speak, he didn't argue, he simply stood with his arms folded, his gaze steady, his presence enough to make Karen uncomfortable. She raised her chin and said louder, "The fines we collect will pay for the repairs. And everyone here should remember that those who don't respect the HOA are the reason delays happen." Her eyes darted toward him, making the crowd follow her gaze. Whispers spread quickly. They thought about his $70,000 fine, connecting dots that painted him as the villain. Yet even as they whispered, some could not ignore the strange calm on his face. Not the face of a man crushed, but the face of someone holding a truth. He turned slowly and walked away, leaving Karen talking to the restless crowd, his silence once again louder than her promises. That night the neighborhood buzzed with talk. People sat in their living rooms discussing the road. Some blamed him for not paying his fine. Others cursed the HOA for their failure. Children repeated stories they heard from parents, saying maybe he was cursed, maybe he had some plan. Maybe that's why he never looked afraid. In every house his name came up, his silence growing larger than words. Karen sat in her living room surrounded by her loyal allies, her wine glass shaking slightly in her hand though she hid it with laughter. She told them confidently that she had everything under control, that the road repairs would begin soon, that the man would be forced to pay or lose his house. But even as she spoke her mind kept circling back to the way he had looked at her. A look that was not broken, not desperate, but calm and waiting. It gnawed at her pride, whispering that maybe she had not won yet. Meanwhile in his house the man sat at his desk again, the folder of papers laid open. He traced his finger slowly over the map of the neighborhood, the line marking the road bold and clear, his name written beside it, ownership sealed legally and beyond question. He leaned back, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The entire community relied on this road, every car, every delivery, every ambulance, every fire truck, every resident who left or entered. All of them passed over land that was his, and not one of them knew it. He thought of the way Karen paraded her power, the way she smiled when she spoke of fines, the way neighbors bowed their heads to her, and he allowed himself a small smile. Soon the ground beneath her throne would crack. Soon she would realize she had built her empire on land she did not control. He whispered to himself in the quiet of his study, "Let her speak, let her boast, because when the truth comes, her words will turn to dust." The silence in the room seemed to answer back, heavy and unbreakable, and he knew the moment of revelation was drawing closer. The road was his weapon, and soon the neighborhood would learn what silence had been hiding all along. Days passed after the road incident and tension in the neighborhood grew thicker. The potholes deepened, cars bounced and scraped as they came in and out. Frustration boiled, yet Karen carried herself with confidence, promising loudly at every corner that repairs were coming. She used the situation to fuel her power, calling special meetings where she reminded residents that their HOA fees were the only thing keeping order. She pointed fingers at him again and again, saying his refusal to cooperate, his unpaid $70,000 fine, was delaying everything. Some neighbors nodded quickly, afraid to disagree. But others shifted uncomfortably, quietly wondering if Karen's words matched the truth. The man heard all of this as he walked past them, but his calmness never broke. His silence never wavered, and that silence only unsettled people more. They could not understand how a man crushed with debt and threats could look so steady. One evening another letter arrived, heavier, colder, stamped with the seal of the HOA attorney. It warned him that if he failed to pay, legal action would be taken, his property could be seized, and he would be dragged to court. Karen made sure everyone knew about the letter. She bragged at the clubhouse that night, standing tall, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "He'll have no choice now," she declared. "The HOA always wins. We will make an example out of him." Her allies clapped, neighbors whispered nervously, some laughed, others felt pity, but none dared to speak against her. She believed this was the final blow, the strike that would shatter his silence and force him to bow. Yet even as she laughed, he sat in his study holding the letter, his expression calm. His eyes on the folder that sat waiting on his desk. He placed the attorney's letter beside the documents that proved ownership of the road, the contrast almost poetic. On one side their threats, on the other his power, a secret he was days away from unleashing. The following morning the neighborhood buzzed with gossip. People stopped him on sidewalks pretending to be sympathetic, whispering, "Maybe you should just pay, maybe it's not worth the fight." Others avoided him entirely, fearing Karen's wrath if they were seen talking to him. Children repeated their parents' words, saying his house would be taken soon, that he would be forced to move out. But he walked past them without a word, watering his garden, trimming his hedges, feeding birds in his yard. His calm behavior only deepened the unease. Some muttered under their breath, "What's wrong with him? Why isn't he scared?" Karen herself grew restless despite her bold speeches. Late at night when the neighborhood grew quiet she found herself staring out the window at his darkened house, wondering why she could not shake the feeling that she was missing something important. She reminded herself over and over that she had won. But doubt crept in like a shadow she could not chase away. Behind those walls the man prepared carefully, not rushing, not speaking, only waiting for the right moment. He looked at the road on the map again. The only road leading in and out of the neighborhood, every crack, every turn, every inch of pavement was his. He thought of the neighbors who whispered against him, of the fines that had piled up, of Karen's smug face at every meeting, and he smiled faintly. Patience was almost over. The storm he had held inside was ready to be unleashed. Soon her threats of court would mean nothing. Soon her power would crumble in front of all those she ruled. He whispered softly in the silence of his study, "Let them take me to court. Let them try. Because the truth is waiting. The truth that will end all of this." Outside the night wind rattled the trees. The neighborhood slept unaware. And in one house a man sat calm and steady, holding a secret strong enough to turn $70,000 into nothing but paper. A secret that would turn the queen of the HOA into the fool of her own game. The night of the next HOA meeting arrived and the clubhouse was filled to the walls. Neighbors packed into chairs, some standing at the back, everyone buzzing with curiosity about the man who had been fined $70,000 and still showed no fear. Karen stood at the front in her red jacket, her clipboard clutched like a sword, her eyes glittering with pride. She cleared her throat and began speaking loudly, reminding everyone about rules, order, and respect. Then she turned her attention to him, her voice sharp. "This man has ignored every notice, every warning, and still dares to defy this community." She lifted the attorney's letter high in her hand so everyone could see, telling them that legal action was ready, that soon he would lose his property. Her words echoed across the room and many nodded nervously. Some whispered that maybe it was time he surrendered. Karen smiled wider, convinced this was her final victory. The man sat in the second row, his posture calm, his eyes steady, his silence louder than her booming words. Neighbors stole glances at him, expecting to see fear, expecting to see shame. But his face showed none. Finally, when Karen finished her long speech and turned to him, demanding he explain himself, he rose slowly. The room fell quiet. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward, the air thick with anticipation. He spoke in a voice calm and steady, not raised, not angry, but carrying a weight that silenced even the whispers. "You fined me $70,000. You threatened me with court. You tried to shame me in front of everyone." He paused, eyes sweeping across the room. "But you all forgot one thing. The road you walk on, the road you drive on, the only road in and out of this neighborhood, is not yours." The room froze. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Karen's smile faltered. He reached into his folder and pulled out documents, thick papers with signatures and seals. He held them high for everyone to see. "This road belongs to me." Gasps filled the air. Neighbors looked at one another in shock. Some stood to see clearer. Karen laughed nervously, trying to dismiss his claim. "Nonsense," she snapped. "The road is community property." But he turned calmly and handed the papers to a neighbor in the front row. "Check it yourself." The man read the first page, his eyes widening, then passed it to the person beside him. A wave of murmurs rolled through the room. It was true, the deed was clear, legally binding, his name printed boldly. He had owned the road for years. Every single car, every delivery, every emergency vehicle had crossed his land. Karen's face drained of color. She stepped forward angrily, trying to shout over the crowd. "This means nothing. It changes nothing. But her voice shook. The man's calm words cut through her panic. It means everything. You fined me $70,000, and yet every dollar you spent, every step you take, depends on ground that belongs to me. Neighbors erupted in disbelief. Some demanded answers from Karen. Some turned on her angrily. How could you not know this? Others stared at the man with newfound respect and fear. Realizing the power he held, Karen slammed her clipboard down on the table, shouting that it was a trick, that she would call the lawyer. But no one listened. Her authority cracked before their eyes. The man gathered his papers, his voice calm as ever. I stayed silent because I wanted you to see the truth for yourself. Now you all know who really holds control. He turned and walked toward the exit, his steps slow, steady, leaving the crowd buzzing like a shaken hive. Behind him Karen stood trembling, her allies whispering frantically. The neighbors' trust in her shattered, and for the first time her throne of power looked fragile. All because the man she thought was broken had revealed the truth she never saw coming. That night whispers spread through every house. People told the story again and again. The road belongs to him. Karen never knew. He owns the only way in and out. The fine that once made him look weak now seemed laughable compared to the power he held. The neighborhood lay restless, caught between fear and awe, and in one house Karen sat in her chair, her wine glass untouched, her mind racing, her pride burning. She had thought she had destroyed him, but now she realized she was the one. Standing on sinking ground, the man however sat in his study, his papers neatly stacked, his eyes calm as ever. He knew this was only the beginning, the first strike in a battle that would end with Karen's downfall. He whispered to himself in the silence. Now they understand. The night after the meeting the entire neighborhood buzzed like a hive torn open. Whispers carried from porch to porch. People gathered in driveways, some still in disbelief, some secretly excited, some fearful, all talking about the same thing. The man owned the road, the only road in and out of the community. Every car, every delivery, every emergency truck depended on land that belonged to him. Karen's once confident voice had cracked in front of everyone, her face pale, her clipboard trembling, and now the neighbors replayed the moment in their minds, the humiliation, the gasps, the power shift they had never imagined. By morning the story spread even further. People stopped him as he walked past, their voices nervous. Is it true? Do you really own the road? He gave no speeches, no boasting, only a calm nod, and that calm unsettled them even more. Karen, however, did not sleep that night. She paced her living room with her phone in hand, calling allies, calling lawyers, calling anyone who might save her position. But the silence on the other end of the line told her what she feared. No one wanted to side with a leader who had been humiliated so publicly. The next day she stormed through the neighborhood, her red jacket wrinkled, her hair not as neat as usual. She banged on doors demanding support, insisting he was lying, that the documents were fake. But each neighbor looked at her with doubt in their eyes. Some dared to say softly, "But we saw the papers, Karen." Others avoided her altogether, closing doors politely but firmly. For the first time her power slipped from her hands. Panic spread in the community. People wondered what he would do. Would he block the road? Would he charge them? Would he cut them off entirely? Mothers whispered in fear about ambulances not being able to enter. Men shook their heads nervously imagining being trapped. The man watched all of this quietly from his porch. His arms folded, his eyes steady. He did not speak. He let their imaginations run wild, because silence was sharper than any threat. By evening rumors had grown into storms. Some swore they saw him measuring the road. Others claimed he had already hired workers to build a gate. Children repeated wild tales that he was going to lock the whole neighborhood in and make everyone pay. Fear tightened its grip. And with fear came anger directed not at him but at Karen. Neighbors confronted her demanding answers, shouting, "You didn't know he owned the road, how could you fine him? How could you risk all of us?" Karen shouted back, desperately, calling them ungrateful, insisting she still had control. But her words fell flat. Her voice no longer carried weight. The man had stolen it with a single revelation. That night she sat in her house, trembling, wine untouched, staring at the window across the street at his calm silhouette. She realized he had not even used his power yet. He had only revealed it, and already her empire was cracking. Meanwhile the man sat in his study once more, the folder closed neatly, his hands resting on it. He thought of how quickly panic had spread, how the whispers had turned against Karen, how fear had shifted power without him lifting a finger. He allowed himself a faint smile. The storm was building exactly as he planned. Every neighbor who once avoided him now whispered his name with respect or fear. Every ally of Karen's now questioned her strength. And Karen herself was breaking under the weight of doubt. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, whispering to himself, "Let them panic. Let them see what silence can do." Outside, the neighborhood tossed and turned in restless sleep, trapped between fear of the man's power and anger at the woman who had ruled them for so long. The balance of power had shifted. And for the first time, everyone realized that the man they once mocked held their future in his hands. The next morning, the neighborhood woke to an unfamiliar sound. The growl of heavy machinery rolling down the only road in, trucks parked across the pavement, workers in vests unloading equipment. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains and rushed onto porches, confusion spreading quickly. What's happening? Why are they here? Karen stormed out of her house in her red jacket, shouting questions, demanding answers, but the workers ignored her, following instructions given directly by the man. He stood calmly at the edge of the road, clipboard in hand, his voice low but firm as he directed them. "Put the posts here. Measure the gate there." The neighbors gasped as realization dawned. He wasn't repairing the road, he was building control. A tall iron gate began to rise across the entrance. Chains rattled, cement poured. The only road in and out of the community was being locked under his command. Panic spread instantly. People ran toward him shouting, "You can't do this. We live here. Our families need this road." But his face remained calm, his silence more terrifying than anger. He only raised his hand once and the workers continued without pause. Karen pushed through the crowd, her voice high and shrill. "Stop this right now. This is illegal. This is against HOA rules." She tried to grab one of the documents from his hand, but he stepped back slowly, his eyes cold, his voice sharp for the first time. "These are not your rules. This is my property, my road, and I will decide how it is used." The neighbors froze, his words cutting deep. Some whispered in disbelief, others stared at Karen, waiting for her to fight back. But she had nothing to show, no papers, no power, only her fading voice. The man turned to the crowd, speaking loudly enough for all to hear. "For years you all believed the HOA controlled everything. For years you let Karen fine you, threaten you, mock you. But every car you drive, every step you take in and out of this place, has always been on my land. And now you finally see the truth." Gasps and murmurs shook the crowd. Some looked ashamed, some furious, some simply afraid. The gate grew taller, stronger, as his words settled like thunder. By evening, chaos rippled through the community. Cars lined up unable to leave until the workers moved equipment. Deliveries turned away. Children cried as their parents argued about what to do. Fear spread like fire. Neighbors turned on Karen, shouting at her in the street. "You promised us control. You told us he was nothing. Now look, we are trapped." Karen's face burned red. She screamed back that it was temporary, that she would fix it. But her voice cracked and nobody believed her. Her clipboard slipped from her hand, papers scattering in the wind. The man watched from a distance, silent, letting the scene unfold, his calm gaze heavier than any threat. He did not need to argue anymore. The road itself was his proof, the gate his power, and the neighborhood's panic his victory. That night lights burned late in every house, phones rang endlessly, lawyers called, plans whispered, but no solution came. The road belonged to him. The law was on his side, and Karen's empire had crumbled in a single day. Meanwhile he sat quietly on his porch, watching the moonlight gleam off the iron bars of the new gate, his face calm, his thoughts steady. He knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. Karen would not surrender easily. She would claw and fight, but the balance had shifted forever. The neighbors who once feared her now looked to him with a mix of dread and dependence, and as the night grew deeper, silence once again wrapped around him like armor. Silence that spoke louder than Karen's loudest threats. Silence that told the neighborhood their lives were now in his hands. The morning after the gate was raised, the neighborhood boiled with anger and fear. People gathered near the entrance shouting in frustration. Some begged to be let out for work. Others demanded answers. Children cried as parents argued loudly. Karen pushed her way through the crowd, her red jacket wrinkled, her hair messy, her voice sharp as she yelled at the man standing calmly near the gate. "You can't do this. You don't have the right. This is community property," she screamed, her hands shaking as she pointed at him. But the man's face remained cold. He pulled the folder from under his arm and held it up, the papers glinting in the sunlight. "This is my land, my road, and the law says I control it." His voice was calm but strong, carrying across the restless crowd. Karen's face paled. She tried to snatch the papers, but he stepped back. The neighbors leaned closer, whispering as they saw the signatures, the seals, the undeniable proof that everything he said was true. Karen's voice grew shrill. "I'll sue you. I'll take you to court. I'll bring the police," she shouted. But the neighbors no longer looked convinced. Some even laughed bitterly. One man shouted back at her, "You didn't even know he owned the road, and you call yourself president." Another woman yelled, "You fined us for flower pots, but you didn't know the ground under your feet wasn't yours." The crowd's anger shifted, no longer aimed at the man but at Karen. Her face flushed red. She waved her hands, desperately, trying to regain control. But every word she spoke only dug her deeper. She turned back to the man, her voice breaking. "This isn't over. You can't humiliate me like this." But he finally spoke with a calm edge that cut through her fury. "I didn't humiliate you, Karen. You did it to yourself. You thought power came from fear. But power comes from truth. And the truth is you built your throne on land you never owned." The crowd gasped at his words, their whispers rising into shouts. Some cheered softly, some clapped. Others simply stared in awe. Karen's shoulders sagged under the weight of her downfall. She tried to raise her clipboard, but her hands trembled so badly that the papers slipped and scattered across the ground. Children laughed. Adults shook their heads. And her once iron grip on the community shattered completely. The man watched in silence, not needing to say another word. His presence alone enough to finish what had begun. Karen stumbled back toward her house, her pride in ruins. The neighbors no longer following her orders, her allies no longer at her side. For the first time in years she was powerless, stripped bare in front of the very people she had ruled with arrogance and cruelty. That night the neighborhood felt different. The gate loomed tall at the entrance, a reminder of who truly held control. The whispers no longer carried Karen's name with fear. Instead they spoke of the man, some with respect, some with unease, but all with recognition of his authority. Inside his house he sat quietly in his study. The folder of papers closed neatly on the desk. He looked out the window at the quiet street, at the lights in the homes of neighbors who once judged him, now dependent on him. His lips curved into a faint smile, not of triumph but of certainty. The game was no longer in Karen's hands. It was in his, and she knew it as well. Across the street she sat in darkness, staring at the gate, her pride shattered, her empire gone, and in her heart the bitter truth burned. The man she tried to destroy now owned not just the road but the future of the neighborhood itself. The next HOA meeting was unlike any before. The clubhouse was packed to the walls, neighbors sitting on the edges of their seats, their voices low with tension, everyone waiting to see what would happen after the chaos at the gate. Karen entered late, her face pale, her red jacket wrinkled, no longer the proud uniform of control but a reminder of her fall. She clutched her clipboard though the papers inside shook in her trembling hands. The man was already there, seated at the front row, calm as ever, his silence heavier than her forced smile. The murmurs filled the room until he finally stood, moving slowly, every eye on him. The noise died down to silence. He held the folder in one hand, his voice steady. "The HOA fined me $70,000. You mocked me, you threatened me, and you thought you had one. But you forgot the road, the only road, belongs to me." He paused, letting his words settle like a stone dropped in still water. "And today I set my condition." The room grew tense, neighbors leaned closer, Karen's breath hitched. He continued, "The fine against me will be erased, effective immediately, and Karen, the one who abused her power, will not walk away without paying her price." Whispers rose quickly, some gasped, others nodded, waiting for his demand. He raised his voice just enough to cut through the noise. "From this day, her fees will rise $5,000 every year. Her burden will be the reminder of what arrogance costs." Karen's knees nearly buckled, her lips parted in disbelief. "You can't do this," she stammered, her voice shaking. But he turned the folder around, showing the papers again, the ownership deed, the proof no one could deny. "I can and I will, unless you want to find another way into this neighborhood." The crowd erupted, some cheering, some laughing bitterly at Karen's fate, others sitting stunned as they realized the tables had fully turned. Karen tried to protest, her voice rising in desperation. "This isn't fair. You can't punish me like this." But her words only brought laughter from those who once feared her fines. A man in the back shouted, "Fair? You fined us for paint colors, for flower pots, for garden hoses. Now you get a taste of your own rules." The room shook with murmurs of agreement. Karen's face burned red, tears of rage pooling in her eyes. She turned to the man, pleading now, you'll ruin me. Please. But his face did not soften, his voice calm but merciless. You tried to ruin me first. You thought power meant control. But power means responsibility. And you failed. Now you pay. He stepped back slowly, his silence returning like thunder. The meeting ended not with her voice, not with her orders, but with his calm footsteps leaving the room. That night the neighborhood glowed with relief. People whispered about freedom, about the end of Karen's reign. Some knocked on his door to thank him. Others simply nodded with respect as he passed. The gate stood tall at the road, a symbol of his victory, and Karen sat in her dark house, staring at the bills she could no longer ignore, her empire broken, her name stained, her pride shattered. Across the street he sat in his study, the folder finally closed. The silence of his mansion no longer heavy but peaceful. He had turned their fine into her punishment, their mockery into her downfall. And as the night deepened he whispered to himself, they thought silence was weakness, but silence was my greatest weapon.